significantly improve their ability to function independently and essentially get closer to optimizing their physical neurologic health. That also means optimizing their emotional and mental health, because when people come in and they really feel quote unquote broken, and then they're able to leave healed or at least much better off, it's just such a joy to experience their gratitude and excitement for now what might be possible when they go home.
That's Dr. Dan Engle, and this is the Pure Joy Podcast. Hello and welcome. I'm super excited today to be bringing you guys an awesome podcast. I talked to Dr. Dan Engle, who is an expert on healing the brain. We talk about so many subjects. We talk about psychedelics, random acts of kindness, float tanks, and how to optimize your psychological well-being. At the end, we get really interestingly into magic mushrooms and how they are being shown to really help with brain recovery, especially things like depression and the big 5 epidemics, which are chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, and pain. So fasten your seatbelts and get ready to have your brain optimized. Hello and welcome. This is Elena Love. And today I'm super excited to have Dr. Dan Engle. He's board certified in psychiatry and neurology with a clinical practice that combines functional medicine, integrative psychiatry, neurocognitive restoration, and peak performance methods. He lectures and consults globally and is a medical director of the Revive Treatment Center of America, as well as medical advisor to On It Labs, the True Rest Float Centers, and several international treatment centers using indigenous plant medicines for healing and recovery. He published his first book, The Conscious Repair Manual, in October 2017, which has received praise from countless in the medical arena. So hi, Dr. Dan, and welcome.
Hey, Elena, it's good to be with you today.
Thanks. Gosh, reading that bio and all your information, I know you've been up to so many things, and there's just so many directions we can take this today. First of all, I'd just love to hear a little bit about what your latest passion is. Like what's exciting you lately?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a buffet of options. One thing I'll say in how you were reading the bio is the book that I published last year is called The Concussion Repair Manual. And you had mentioned it as the Conscious Repair Manual. And it makes me think that would be a really great second book to launch. Because that's one of the things that I'm super excited about that I've been involved with for the last 10 years is consciousness tools and different areas of intervention and support that I can work with teams and individuals to help them essentially facilitate upgrading their consciousness. And it's not necessarily to say that we're going from a place of broken to a place of being healed, as much as it is saying that our process in this life stream is a constant evolutionary process and pattern. And that includes our consciousness. And when I think of consciousness, I think of how we live our lives in the most fulfilled, optimized way, in the most harmony with all of our relationships, and joyfully expressing what we're here to do as we share our unique genius with the world.
I love that, because I do feel like everybody, if you were to ask anybody, everybody wants to be more conscious. Everybody wants to have an optimal working brain and body. And I know that's really what you do. You work with people that maybe, I don't know if you would say they have broken brains, but they have some kind of cognitive repair that they need. Or can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of it in two arenas. One is the hardware. So if somebody does come in with a brain injury, and that's what we do at Revive Treatment Centers, we heal people and facilitate the healing of their traumatic brain injury, concussion, stroke, a variety of different brain conditions. Occasionally, it will go into the Lyme spectrum or tertiary Lyme or some kind of infectious disease or some kind of metabolic condition, as there's a lot of different things that affect brain function and cognition. And so we facilitate that through functional neurology and regenerative medicine practices. And that could be anything from stem cell therapies to intranasal and IV therapies to the variety of suite of technologies that we have. So that's on the hardware side. And then on the software side are the consciousness tools and technologies. And that's helping people upgrade their mind stream and their operating system and their internal belief structures around how they view themselves and the world. And when we bring hardware technologies with software technologies together, then you have the best chance for efficiently and effectively helping people upgrade their internal operating system.
So, like, if someone were to come to you with all of those things that you have available, what is one of the first things you do? Like, how would you go about? I know it's different for each person, but could you kind of give an example of what you would, how you would approach this? Because there's just so many things.
Yeah. It kind of depends on if I'm working with somebody on site in person, like at our clinic, then we'll put them through a suite of labs first to understand what their metabolics look like. So like a functional medicine approach. What do their blood chemistry panels look like? What do their infectious disease markers or inflammatory markers and hormones look like? So once we have a baseline of where their labs are and we understand what their history is, many people come in when they've tried a whole lot of other things to help heal their brain injury. So we've got a lot of paperwork and clinical reports and brain scans that they've used before. So we go through all of that history and that data. And then we do an exam, a functional neurology exam, to understand exactly where the brain injury is, how they're functioning now. And that could look like how their posture and balance is, what their visual movements look like, what their cognitive speed looks like, essentially like all of the different executive functions and cognitive functions. Then we have a baseline. And once you look at the baseline in their exam, then we have an idea of how to put them through the suite of services. And that's everything from hyperbaric oxygen, transcranial magnetic stimulation, video nystagmography, which looks at eye fields and helps people come back into a way of optimizing and organizing their eye fields in ways that maximize smooth pursuits and the ability for the brain to be able to track everything that they're visually looking at in space. And then posturography is the ability to see where their balance is and then to help them through a series of practices gain more balance and more ability to track themselves in space and do that with coordinated movement. And then we've got a gyrostim, which is actually one of the coolest pieces of technology I've ever seen, where you strap somebody into this kind of like pilot seat, and then you can spin them in each of the three primary axes. And we spin them at a particular speed and rate and axis of rotation that stimulates that specific area where their brain is weak or challenged or injured, so that when we spin them, we can activate that specific area and then track how well that improves over time. And then if they want to, they can opt into everything from like intranasal stem cells, because stem cells have the best regenerative potential, and IV therapies, including just basic vitamin and mineral cocktails, everything up to NAD, which drives cellular energy. And when we do all of these things in concert, we see massive benefit. We see massive gains. And it's different for everybody, but to the point that we've helped people get out of wheelchairs, be able to significantly improve their ability to function independently, and essentially get closer to optimizing their physical neurologic health. That also means optimizing their emotional and mental health, because when people come in and they really feel quote unquote broken, and then they're able to leave healed or at least much better off, it's just such a joy to experience their gratitude and excitement for now what might be possible when they go home.
Yeah. And I know that must be so amazing for people that maybe don't even have hope, and then they come in and are able to just have this huge transformation through working with you. There's actually a quote on your website by Virgil Clunder, and he says, as someone who's been blessed to mentor literally thousands of people around the world, I've been teaching personal development and peak performance for the last 33 years. With Dr. Dan, I've experienced more growth in every area of my life, physically, professionally, spiritually, and emotionally in the last year than in all the previous 50 years of my total life. That's pretty amazing in 1 year that he's able to have that kind of transformation.
Yeah. Virgil and we've done some really good work together. And that has been mostly in the software arena, in the consciousness arena. And when I have the opportunity to work with somebody, it could be on site, like in our clinic. And if it's one-on-one in the software arena, it's oftentimes virtually as we're doing coaching strategies. And there's a lot that we can do to help assess where people are at in their own belief structures and how they live their life up to this point and what kind of makes them who they are. And that's what got me into psychiatry in the first place, is just the curiosity of how so many different things impact how we view ourselves. And if we can each get to the place of ultimately being able to say, I love and accept myself fully. And most people, unfortunately, in our day and age can't say that with truth. They might desire that to be the case. And that's part of the work that we can do, is understand what are the limiting beliefs, what are the underlying traumas, what are the transgenerational or cultural patterns that put those programs in place, and then work towards being able to stay strong in the statement with full authenticity that, yes, I do in every aspect love and accept and appreciate and celebrate myself fully.
What would that look like? So as I hear you talking, I think about like basically reprogramming our subconscious or our consciousness, because, I talk about this a lot with people on this podcast about our words that we use to describe ourselves or how we move through the world and our thought systems. So how would you go about like helping someone to kind of reprogram that or undo all the negative stuff that they're telling themselves or that's creating their world?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. And that's oftentimes kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's an ongoing exploration and evaluation about what has systematically been put into place to lock in a particular belief system or self or worldview. It's a bit challenging in that 85% or so of what makes us who we are, personality-wise and in a personality construct, is set by the time we're 5 years old, plus or minus. And that's from developmental child psychology research. And that also continues to essentially be the operating system, although, of course, it matures over time. But the general construct is the usual operating system until we as adults make the conscious choice to do our work and to really get into the weeds and to deeply understand where those programs come from. So if that's the case, if most of what makes us who we are and how we think is set by the time we're 5, then where does that all come from? A lot of it is how we are raised as children in our immediate environment. A lot of that is genetic as well, because there's something called program learning or morphic resonance. And the simple example for that is if you take 2 groups of rats, and one group of rats you have as a control, and they're not essentially learning this control measure. They're just kind of like doing rat stuff. And then the other experimental group, you put them through a series of mazes and you train them to work the mazes faster and faster and faster. And then those 2 groups of rats have children and the offspring. And the offspring of the control group that wasn't learning anything, they just continue to run the mazes at the same rate as their parents and grandparents, essentially. Right. In the group of rats that was trained to run the mazes, their offspring, straight out of the gate, will automatically know how to run those mazes faster than the control group.
Wow.
Without any training.
So that's just instinctual memory, it sounds like, or cellular memory, which is passed along.
Right. So the learning is accelerated through genetics that are encoded into the system, as well as trauma that is encoded into the system. Yeah. So learned behavior through targeted exercises, as well as learned behavior through trauma response, is passed on generationally.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this transgenerational propagation of learned behaviors. So part of that makes us who we are. And then there's this cultural thing that makes us who we are. And we start getting information culturally straight out of the gate, especially now more than ever, because our super young youth and little children are exposed to all of this media that we've never been exposed to before. And part of that is, unfortunately, why we're in this epidemic of youth-based depression and anxiety to the extent we've never seen before. There's been a 200% increase in youth suicide with kids aged 10 to 14 years old in the last 10 years.
And you believe a lot of that has to do with the social media and just with, do you think a lot of it has to do with like online bullying or social media, or just like a desire to be part of something that they're, I don't know, like, what do you think is the main reason that's...
I think it's a huge result of social media, online bullying, and this kind of like barrage of intense social interaction that is not face-to-face. It's nebulous, it's virtual, it's people's such over concern about their reputation and how they're viewed by people that they don't even know. Now we're kind of jockeying for social worth depending on how many Facebook likes that we have. And, all of these things that we're not used to. And that gets trickled down to our youth, and we haven't adequately taught them how to navigate such a really strange kind of new social phenomenon.
Right. The parents have to relearn too how to parent your children through that. I heard a story of a little girl who showed up to a competition and she was so exhausted and she didn't do well. I think she was a gymnast, and she was crying her eyes out. She said, well, I was up from 2 to 4 a.m. checking to see how many likes I got on my post. So literally these kids are sleeping with their phones and they're checking their likes all night long. That's insane. Yeah.
It's intense. And that starts to get hardwired into the neural network while these really young brains and minds are growing and molding. So the personality construct is largely set early on, and yet the brain's still developing its hardwire system until our early 20s. Right? So we're building these neural networks phenomenologically and neurologically, as well as we're building these personality constructs emotionally and psychically, all around this really new phenomena of social media and social worth based on internal representation of a whole world of people that we've never actually even met in person.
Right. And we probably will never meet. So what would you say to someone listening that is an adult and thinking, oh, wow, like how can someone that maybe isn't going to come and work with you, what are some things that they can do to help their brains or help them overcome some of the stuff we've just been talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. Like, okay, now that this is the landscape, what do we do with it? And how do we navigate it? I think we're really in an exciting time, and we're also at a scary time. Crisis precedes transformation every time. So there's this massive opportunity to gain more and more awareness of the ramifications of how we live, to be more consciously engaging the process of having deep, meaningful connections. And I get the sense that in many ways, it's better than it's ever been. We have it better than we've ever had it. There's more information that is available. Like the sub-Saharan African tribesman has as much information in the palm of his hand than the president had 13, 14 years ago. There's less pestilence, there's less war, there's less famine in most areas of the world. And yet there's this epidemic of mental health illness, anxiety, depression, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, chronic pain, neurologic and psychologic. And so how do we navigate this and what do we do? I believe it's super important to get back into an experience of felt community and an experience of feeling contact with other humans and consistently orienting towards a more positive psychology framework than the historic, more negative psychology framework, which is like when I was trained in psychiatry and in psychotherapy, it's essentially bringing people in by themselves, sitting them down, asking them to talk about the worst things that are going on in their lives, and then wondering why it's hard for them to feel optimistic about healing.
Right. Making them go through the whole story again.
Right. And, you know, the benefit of that is that it creates, ideally, a trusting relationship where the most intimate shadow material can be shared and talked about and healed. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
The challenge with psychotherapy, though, is it's hard to oftentimes get to a narrative of the core issues because, again, it's most of what makes us who we are is set by the time we're 5 years old. So there's a lot of things that we remember that's associated with core issues, but oftentimes it doesn't necessarily get efficiently to the core. So if we're able to reconstruct a positive psychology framework, which is like, okay, let's really identify what's going well. How are you awesome? What's happening? What can you be grateful for? Where can you find your yes? How can you continue to orient towards an experience of gratitude and an experience of a recognition that there's a lot that is going well? What are the strengths that we can build on? As much as looking at what's not going so well. Because it's hard to talk to somebody who's in a massive suicidal depression. And I've been in experiences of massive suicidal depression in my life. There was a long stretch of about a year where I was in a suicidal depression and I didn't want to be around other people. And I certainly didn't want to be around happy people. And because it was like a reflection of where I was not. And it was just like, it was such a disconnect or dissonance. And it makes you even feel like worse about yourself because you're not there, right? And judgmental of them, like screw you and your happiness, you know? Yeah. And it was a pattern that I had to go through, and it was a process that I had to go through. And it was really important. And it was actually the year after I moved back from the jungle, and I was living in the jungle for a year, no running water, no electricity, no other gringos, it was just like me studying with the medicines. And it was beautiful and super impactful. And then when I came back to Western civilization in the United States, it was hard for me to reintegrate. Yeah, everything was moving so fast and there's so much consumption and how we live our lives. And it just doesn't feel like we're on a sustainable trajectory. And I was like in this major existential crisis. And it was super important. And I do believe the dark night of the soul has its place. Our pain has purpose. And when we can find ways to turn our pain into power, then we can start moving away from trying to shame and guilt ourselves for the things that we repress and have tried to stick back in the closet. And while we're just still trying to put only our best selves and faces on Instagram, many of us aren't living an authentic life. So I do believe that there's this importance of being able to come into communities where we can express ourselves authentically and be really present with guilt and shame and grief and the things that we haven't like metabolized through our system because we're programmed to bond. That's a part of our blueprint. And if we can come into contact with people that we have resonance with, like minds, like hearts, like spirits, and we can grow and celebrate life, and we can also share the challenges because there's a lot that is challenging, while there's also a lot that's inspiring about how we're living our lives today, culturally and globally. I do believe there's this massive opportunity to come back to a really beautiful way of connecting and reconnecting with each other And then I also have a real passion for super clear and honest inventory about how we are living our lives individually and collectively in a sustainable way that respects our natural resources, including all other species on the planet.
I so agree with so much of what you said, and so much comes up with that, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and you kind of covered it, is do you think a lot of this depression and these things that people are experiencing having to do with us getting so far away from nature? Because you're talking about being in Peru and experiencing nature for a year, and then you're in this concrete jungle suddenly, or in a place where there's not nearly as much day-to-day contact with the earth.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think particularly with our youth, they spend so much time in screen time, and their parents spend so much time in screen time, that there's this lack of bonding that we're used to. And part of our blueprint is that we come from an experience of being bonded to our natural environment. Everything comes from our natural world. And how are we treating our natural world? How are we consistently extracting and extracting and extracting with this consumptive mentality, with very little, if any, concern of future generations, and doing things mindlessly without the respect of where things might go when they're out of my immediate sight. Like, there's no throwing something away.
There's no away.
It doesn't go right. It doesn't go away. It just goes conveniently out of my eyesight
somewhere else. Yeah.
It goes in.
I think about India, because they don't, here in America, we have our dumps and we have our places our trash go, and they're just living in it. So they don't have an away there at all.
Yeah, and a lot of our trash gets shipped out of the United States. So that we don't even have to see it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have, we have a ton of landfills and a huge, and I don't know exactly, I would say maybe it's around 30 to 40%, but I can't really be totally clear about that. The Center for Planetary Culture is a great resource for this kind of stuff. And that's where I started getting data like the ocean's 30% more acidic than it was 40 years ago. That's a big freaking number, by the way.
That's huge.
150 to 200 species go extinct every day. Something that was a very unique species on the planet now is no longer alive. That took thousands, if not millions of years to evolve, is now extinct and gone. And then when we really grok that, and it's not like the sexiest topic of conversation in the room, but it's something that has to be shared and acknowledged, that when we are not only disconnected from nature, we're treating it poorly. And it's easier to treat our natural environment poorly when we're not connected to it. It's like the whole bullying thing on social media. Like when we're not connected to people, it's easier to be rude and mean and inconsiderate. But when you're meeting people face to face, it's not near as convenient or easy to do that.
So other than getting involved in your community and getting more connected with people, I do have an amazing community. And part of it has to do with the fact that I have a passion for living healthy. So finding other people in that general topic, it makes it easier to have these discussions. But I know there's probably a lot of people that are like, well, where's the first place that they can start? I'd love to talk to you a little bit about float tanks, because I'm super passionate about that. What are some ways people can just start really connecting in and finding those synchronicities and those people and the connections?
Yeah. Well, I think of one thing that I personally do on a regular basis, if not every day, is I take long walks in nature. And I do that with as little screen time or audio as possible, because it's easy to walk in nature while you're listening to a podcast. And sometimes I do that too. But oftentimes I just want to get in nature just to be there, and I want my attention there. I live in Boulder at the base of the Flatirons, and it's just such a gorgeous place to be. And that's one of the reasons I moved back here to Colorado, is to be back in nature. And I spend a lot of time at our farmers markets, and we do most of our shopping there. And I like to get to know
with the people, so you can ask them questions about their food.
Yeah, I want to know. If I'm not growing my own food, I at least want to know where it comes from. And so I want to understand and be involved in the whole life cycle, including now where I get my meat. I was raw vegan for 5 years, and And I started eating meat again because I realized that there were certain micro and macronutrients that I was trying to desperately supplement. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, I've run raw food, raw vegan detox centers, and I know the benefit of that level of cleansing and purification. And it's the best reboot for the system to go through a process of cleansing and purification when you do it mindfully and do it well. And for some people, it works long term as a maintenance strategy and as a dietary approach. And for many people, it doesn't. And I realized specifically for me, and specifically now when I'm working with people in brain recovery, is the raw vegan approach is not the best healing diet for brain injury. And I had 6 massive concussions that led me into this field. And I realized that I just knew inherently that my brain wasn't optimized in its function. And then I started bringing in eggs again and fish again. And it was hard because I was Buddhist. I had committed to the monastic vows of no harm. And I was running the centers and I really wanted to crack this code. And I was doing it for spiritual reasons and environmental reasons. And then I did that for years and years and years. I got up to the point where I was spending $1,200 to $1,500 a month on supplements trying to get my brain back online. And I was like, okay, this isn't working, nor is it sustainable, nor can I passionately speak about it if most people aren't going to be able to do it. And so I went through this whole kind of like re-trajectory, and now I do bring meat back into my diet, and I'm starting to hunt again. And I grew up hunting. I'm going bow hunting in about a month because I want to be a part of the whole life cycle. I want to know where my food comes from, and I want to know the people that grow it, and I want to make those personal relationships. And for me, that's the core of coming back into a healing experience in humanity, is making those personal relationships again and really getting to know the people in our community and who is the guy that's fixing my plumbing, because although I have done that in the past, it's not my genius and I would probably screw things up. And it's also not the best use of my time. So like, who's that guy? And who's my mailman? And who's the guy fixing my car? And like, do I know these people? And do I really appreciate what value they add to my life?
That's been coming in super strong for me lately. I've been getting this, I just call it a download because I don't know what else to call it, but this conscious awareness and like these messages that come to me that say when I get to the gas station, because here in Oregon, the guy fills your gas for you. And so I'll roll down the window and make some kind of connection with them. And this guy, not that long ago, saw my Arizona plates and we just made this eye contact. And I just felt like there was like, yeah, you matter. You're important. Whether you're washing my windows or pumping my gas, like you matter. And I want to talk to you and I want to know a little bit about you. So I think what you're saying is so profound because a lot of things that happen with people is they feel like they don't matter and that people aren't really seeing them or they don't feel seen. Maybe if they're in a relationship that's poor or they're single, there's a lot of single people, just to be able to have those day-to-day connections. And we can be the people at a grocery store or anywhere that can maybe make that person's day better because we take an extra 2 minutes to get off our phones and make eye contact and ask them how they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those little things, they matter. And this is like coming back to the adage or the historical reference to a practice that feels good, which is random acts of kindness. And especially when we do random acts of anonymous kindness.
Yes.
Like, right. And I got back into this practice with a friend of mine because she was doing this and she was just getting so lit up by choosing once a week to do something randomly, anonymously with somebody in her immediate environment and neighborhood. She was way out in the boonies. It took effort for her to like go a mile or 10 miles to the next person and leave flowers or bake a little like sweet something nourishing and put it in their mailbox or leave a note like, I think you're awesome. Thank you for being in the world. Like, who does that anymore? Not many people. But when you get something like that and you receive it, you're like, oh my gosh, I have a renewed faith in humanity.
And I love the idea of bringing that back in because I know that was a movement for a while, the random acts of kindness. And That makes me want to go do some of those this week too.
Right.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And it feels
Yeah.
good to do that too. When it's particularly when it's anonymous, because it's like it has this like little trickster kind of energy, like I'm doing something that other people don't know I'm doing. That simply for the fact that the act feels enlivening, it brings me joy to experience somebody else's joy, and I'm doing it because of that experience, not because I want to be validated or even recognized for doing it, but just because it feels good to do it. And at times I'll do something too. Like if I see my mailman and we just strike up a conversation, I'm like, dude, I totally appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for being awesome and smiling every time you walk up to my front door. And I'm not saying that because I want to be recognized as somebody who's trying to pump up his ego. It's more like, I just want to be able to connect and feel the goodness of sharing a heartfelt interaction and dropping one little pebble into this stream of growing happiness back in our world.
And that's it right there, tying back to people that are depressed or people that are going through something. I'm imagining as you're doing that, our heart center is almost like a portal. As we open that heart center, however that looks to us, imagining this heart opening and then the other person's heart opening, there's an actual palpable connection that's being made, which completely can transform your cells in that moment. I've seen it. I've felt it.
Yeah, absolutely. Love and gratitude and appreciation and these feeling states. These are the things that we can consistently give without anything diminishing. It's like the Buddha says, the candle of consciousness or love that lights 1,000 candles doesn't diminish its own light.
Yeah.
Right? When we there's so much love. Fundamentally, it is boundless. Like if we have multiple children, it's not like we love one more or less. Well, sometimes we do, but
at moments.
Right, totally. Or if we have, if I have an experience of love pouring through me into the world, then oftentimes as that happens, I'm getting more back. I'm getting more joy back, gratitude back, appreciation back. Whether it's directly or indirectly, again, if I'm just doing like these random anonymous acts, I'm getting it back because I'm feeling good about what I'm doing.
What part does diet play in this as far as like sugar consumption? How do you work with people on that level of maybe helping them clean up their diet? And what have you seen happen after someone makes, like, I know you talked a little bit about cleansing and eating a cleansing diet for a while.
Mm-hmm. Massively important. And it's one of the hardest things to change. And so kind of along the lines of eating, there's a Sufi saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you change the standard American diet? One bite at a time, one step at a time, and with a mindful approach and with accountability. Because if we don't hold ourselves accountable and if we don't have others holding us accountable, it can be super easy to slip back into old patterns. And so it's helpful to have the clear, honest inventory and oftentimes a coach to be able to give us a clear assessment of where we're at. So it's super helpful to track diet. So if I'm working with somebody for the first 1 to 2 weeks, as we're working together, all I want you to do is track what you're eating. I don't want you to change anything. I don't want you to even judge anything. We're not going for anything right now. We're just tracking where you're at because I want to know where you're at and you need to know where you're at. And then when we are clear about what's being eaten, when it's being eaten, how much is being eaten, and what's the emotionality around eating and the relationship with food, then we've got a lot of data to grow from. And from there, we pick the first necessary intervention. So if somebody's eating too much, that's a place to start. If somebody's eating too late and they're not eating all day until night and then they're, chowing at night, that's going to screw up ideal metabolic rate and digestive function. So we need to change the timing. what is being eaten. If it's just fried food and ho-hos, we're going to need to change that part. And maybe we don't change how much, but we change what. And so we move from the standard American diet to what I call the RAD diet. So we're moving from the SAD diet to the RAD diet. And the RAD diet is the recovery acceleration diet.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
That right there is like if the person hears those three words together, like if you change your diet, you're going to accelerate your recovery. That's motivational to a lot of people, especially if they're motivated to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly if there's a motivation to change. So if somebody's really motivated, that's why crisis precedes transformation every time. Mm-hmm. If people aren't motivated, then there's not as much impetus or willingness to change and stay in the thick of it. Because changing your diet is oftentimes challenging. And we need to have a big motivation. And crisis is a great motivator. And, if things are going well, we don't really have as much of an impetus to change. So
nobody wants to change if they're fine, if they feel fine.
Yeah. And so we can actually turn towards it and say, wow, this is a great opportunity for you to do something different now. And I think of crisis, this is Webster Dictionary definition. Crisis is the stage in a series of events at which all future events, for better or worse, is determined. So it serves as this turning point. If the trajectory has been in a particular orientation, then at this crisis point, we have the opportunity to do something different. And to essentially say okay, we can honor everything that has got you up to this point and honor the motivation for change. And I'm going to hold you accountable. This is probably going to feel like some tough love because I'm not going to just allow you to drop back into old behaviors without recognizing it and helping you identify why.
Yeah. And especially if they're in healing mode, they can probably see the difference if they do go back to their old behaviors. Mm-hmm. They'll notice the inflammation in the brain or like the thinking isn't as clear or whatever the symptom tends to be for the particular person.
Yeah.
I know you work with psychedelics with people, and how have you seen that? What particular psychedelics do you use, or can you talk about that a little bit?
That tends to be one of the more exciting areas of research because the medicines that are being studied and utilized today are very good for the 5 primary psychiatric conditions that we really don't know what to do. And we try and just address it with chronic pharmaceuticals and cognitive behavioral therapy. And these 5 big epidemics are chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, and pain. And many of the medicines that are unfortunately illegal and stuck in Schedule 1 and don't deserve to be there because Schedule 1 means there's no known medical benefit and they're highly addictive. Most of the medicines fail on both accounts. For example, psilocybin is the safest mind-altering substance that we know. And that's experientially because it involves less ER visits when people are having a quote-unquote bad trip, even fewer than cannabis. That's from the Global Drug Survey in 2017. And it's also the safe pharmacologically. Like there's no known lethal dose. You'd have to take like pounds and pounds and pounds of psilocybin internally. And you wouldn't do that because you'd throw up before you ever got to any kind of lethal dose. So it's safe. It actually helps addiction, helps pain, helps depression. There's both micro-dosing benefits and there's macro-dosing benefits. And the one current organization that's going for initiative right now for legalization is an organization called OPS. And they're in Oregon, the Oregon Psilocybin Society. And they're going for a ballot initiative in 2020. I don't have any affiliation with them. I just think what they're doing is rad. And essentially, it's a hybrid model between recreational and medical, which means recreational means like everybody can do it. We're going to decriminalize it and you can own it, possess it, utilize it. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're ready for that. And it's kind of like where medical cannabis was in the mid-90s. We passed medical cannabis laws and then we expected that recreational laws would eventually come, and they did. And now most states are passing recreational laws. And we're not saying it's a medical use because that means you have to have a specific medical indication in order to opt in. And that leaves out a whole number of people that could benefit through these kinds of experiences. Mm-hmm. So what it's saying is essentially anybody over 21 which is the same age that people can drink alcohol, and alcohol is much more dangerous for dependence and lethality than even psilocybin. So we're saying anybody over 21 can have a medical clearance and a psychiatric evaluation to make sure that they're safe to have an experience. And then they opt in at their leisure and at their will to have an experience at a registered facility with trained providers. And it's like, that's a fairly well thought out initiative. There's not a whole lot of reasons to say no. So that's why I think that would be one of the earliest kind of next steps. And I expect that Colorado, where I live, is going to go, and I'm going to be a part of that movement here in Colorado. I expect California is going to go, and that's already moving. And these are the 3 states that have had initiatives for the legalization of psilocybin up to this point, but they haven't really done it in a mindful way. And I think the OPS initiative is probably the best first next step.
And I know it's probably better done under care with someone like you than just people going out and doing it recreationally, because a lot of times people don't know how to process what they've experienced or what they've seen. So what would you say to the integration part?
Absolutely necessary. It's probably more important than the experience itself, because when people don't integrate, they can get really destabilized, and a lot can come up through the process. And it's important to have support on the other side. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And it's where we take our meditation off our cushion and we take our process of a peak experience and we make it workable for life. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then we really start to be able to utilize the expression. And I could go into mountains of data, but this is one of the more cool data points. 2006 Johns Hopkins study with psilocybin, 94% of first-time users felt that it was in the top 5 most meaningful experiences that they had ever had in their entire life. And this lasted beyond 14 months when the study ended. 94% of people, first-time users, said that was one of the top 5 most amazing experiences that they had ever had. That's just personal development. That's personal fulfillment. That's not the fact that psilocybin is also great for depression. It's great for chronic pain, particularly with cluster headaches. It's great for addiction, tobacco and alcohol. It's great for all these things. Those are medical conditions. So we have the developmental side, optimization, human optimization. We also have the healing component. And I mean, we didn't even get into MDMA and its use. And
right.
The list is long. And Full Spectrum Medicine is one of the websites that I run and curate. And it's a education advocacy platform for psychedelic medical research. Also, people can go to maps.org, hefter.org, and some of the cooler, kind of more contemporary podcasts and platforms are reset.me and the Third Wave podcast. Those are kind of
okay, those are places. Great resources.
And a book that Michael Pollan just wrote called How to Change Your Mind. Excellent, excellent book.
Well, I'll put all those in the show notes so that if anybody's listening and they want to kind of get deeper into it. I did want to ask you briefly too about floating, because I feel like that's something a lot of people don't know about. And I know you've talked about it before, and it's something I've experienced. You talk about being out in nature without any audio or input. Can you just talk a little bit about the float tank experience and why you feel like it's important?
Yes, I am super excited about flotation therapy, as much as I am about psychedelic medical research and neurologic regenerative medicine, because anybody can float. It's meditation on steroids. It's the first time that we've been without sensory experience since we were a fetus, since we were conceived. There's no light, no sound, no gravity, no proprioception. So we get to really get in touch with what was right behind the curtain of the subconscious, and it rehabilitates the neuroendocrine axis, the brain and the hormone axis, because it helps calm most people's fight or flight mechanism. And most people are living in chronic states of low-grade stress, if not high-grade stress. And the more we float, the more we get in touch with a deep sense of ourselves and the things that are most meaningful and the things that are percolating in that, closet of our subconscious that we weren't in touch with. So if people are going to float, I recommend them to stack do like 3 to 4 floats over a 2-week period, like two a week for 2 weeks, and then get into a felt experience. If people are able to do 8 to 10 floats, they will notice a massive difference in how they think and feel. Absolutely. It's worked with everybody that I've recommended that to. And flotation centers are just popping up more and more.
Yeah. They're in every town I've been in. So I think that's awesome because you actually have a prescription there. So they should do, if someone really wanted to get an effect, do at least 8 of them within, what would you say, like a month or 2?
Yeah.
Like one a week kind of thing?
If you're able to do 1 to 2 a week over 6 to 8 weeks, then that would be a really good stack. And, it's a good entry point. We use a lot of flotation for both neurological recovery and for brain optimization in that kind of like psychedelic self-exploration, self-development, self-potential arena. And just come back to psychedelics too. Not everybody's ready to have a psychedelic experience, particularly if they have mania or psychosis or they're on psychiatric medications. But flotation therapy is one of those things that has been instrumental for many people coming off of psychiatric medications.
Yeah, because for anybody that's scared or just not sure, like you're not taking anything. You're just taking away, depriving all the external input. Thank you so much. You are a wealth of information, and I know there's so much more people can learn from you. So what's the best way for people to find you and or see what you're up to?
Yeah, thanks for asking. My primary personal website is drdanengle.com, drdanengle.com. We talked a little bit about neurological recovery in the book that I wrote, Concussion Repair Manual, and that's at its own URL, theconcussionrepairmanual.com. Our clinic is revivecenters.com, and the psychedelic medical platform that I mentioned is fullspectrummedicine.com.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll make sure I put all those in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to see it, just click on the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, always good to connect, Elena. I wish you so well.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, that was kind of Mr. Toad's wild ride, like I warned you in the beginning to fasten your seatbelt. That was just the tip of the iceberg with Dr. Dan. As you know, I've known him for years, and we've talked about so many topics and discussed so many things, and there's just so much more deep diving to go. So I really hope you guys go to the show notes and link into some of his websites and pages and go down that rabbit hole of, if you're interested in psychedelics, go down that. If you're interested in brain regeneration, that's amazing. And for me, the float tank thing is just like, that's my thing. And I've had amazing experiences with float tanks, and I plan on, now that I've heard Dr. Dan talk about it again, I'm just going to find the local Bend float tanks and get my butt in there. I hope you guys do the same, or you find just one thing that inspired you today from this podcast. Maybe get out there and do a random act of kindness. Whatever it is, I hope you have an amazing week. And I always invite you to join me at purejoyplanet.com. Check out my free classes, my free information, my free recipes. Join one of our courses. And let me know how I'm doing. Send me a rating and review on iTunes and give me a request for something you might want to hear about, whether it's interviewing someone or a certain topic. And I'll see you next week. I love you guys so much, and thank you for listening.